Okay, Joel, I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, sort of a two-part question, but it's the same question in one. I hear people say a lot, I want to send my kids to public schools so they can be that shining light or that example or that whatever, maybe the influence to those around them of a godly example. Or even I feel called to teach in the public school system so I can push some of my Christian influence on those who are under me or who are with me. They both sound like noble purposes.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts on that?
That is probably one of the main responses we get when we talk about homeschooling, and especially from our perspective, homeschooling only. And if you notice, my biggest beef with the system, actually I didn't talk about it as much tonight as I probably should have, but is the economic underpinnings of the whole thing. It is a socialistic system beyond anything else in society except maybe Social Security. When you are forced to pay for someone else's education, when the state takes money from some person and gives it to another person, I don't want to be that person receiving that salary. To me, that's corrupt. To me, that's immoral. I would never do that personally. And the laws are stacked against us as far as being an influence. Now, I do know that you can have things like the Fellowship of Christian Athletes. You can have these groups on campus that have their local meetings, and you can invite people to them. I never went to them, so I don't know how effective they are. I hear from some teachers personally who say that they have witnessed, they themselves have been an influence on people in a great way, and so that it was worth it. And from my experience, I was raised in public schools, and a second objection I'll get to in a second. I was raised through the public school system. I didn't come to active faith in Christ until I was about 19 or 20. And I can tell you that with one exception, from my grade school all the way to 12th grade, not a single Christian in that school witnessed to me. Not a single Christian in those schools invited me to Fellowship of Christian Athletes or any other group. Not a single teacher tried to be a positive influence on me other than with paddle, which did happen a few times. But so from my own experience, it just didn't happen. Now, I say that, and people will contradict me and say, well, I know someone who it did happen to, so maybe it does. But the odds are certainly stacked against you when you're not allowed lead prayer in school. Obviously, a Christian person can pray on their own, but a teacher's not allowed to lead prayer, and they're not allowed to let a student lead prayer. And of course, you see the curriculums devolving worse and worse over time. But that's what happens when you have a humanistic system of law that's not God's law, and therefore it's not freedom. Eventually, the humanists will run it. And so all of the people who called themselves Christians and all the good Christian America people of the late 19th century who promoted public schooling as a way of and it was very strident at that time. You have a lot of what we call Christian America textbooks written at that time. A way of Christianizing the population through the public school. And yet the whole thing was a secular humanist system to begin with. And eventually, over time, guess what? The secular humanists run it. Because it's a system of top-down rule, and Christianity's not built on that, and you can't sustain a Christian system on that. So, the second objection, and I'll anticipate maybe someone's question with this, is that I went through the public school system, and I turned out okay, and of course that doesn't justify putting someone else through a meat grinder, but like I said, I went through it, and I actually didn't turn out okay, because I was actually ready to rebel, and when I was 17, 18, I dove off into heavy metal, and I was hanging out with guys who did drugs and drank. I never did drugs myself, thank the Lord, but I was in that lifestyle. Who knows where I would have ended up if it hadn't been for a friend of mine who invited me to his church when I was 19, outside of the public school system. So that's my testimony on that.
You talked about how to control a mass of people.
Yeah.
And talking about the school system, was that the reason for the school system to be designed for controlling the mass of people of, this is when you do this, this, and this? And
this is rather lengthy, but it's worth it. This was written by an educational reformer named Charles Francis Adams, Jr. He was actually a descendant of the Adams family. John Adams, John Quincy Adams, we're talking a couple more generations down the line. Charles Francis Adams, Jr. in 1880, this was his view of education in America in 1880. Most of you indeed cannot but have been part and parcel of one of those huge mechanical educational machines, or mills, as they might more properly be called. They are, I believe, peculiar to our own time and country, and are so organized as to combine as nearly as possible the principal characteristics of the cotton mill and the railroad with those of the model state prison. The school committee is the board of directors, while the superintendent, the chief executive officer, sits in his central office with a timetable, which he calls a program before him, by which 1 hour twice a week is allotted to this study, a half an hour 3 times a week to that, 20 hours a term to a third, and at such a time one class will be at this point, another class at that, and the whole moving with military precision to a given destination at a specified date. He can at any moment tell you exactly where any squad or class, as he would term it, is, and what it ought at least to be doing. Mechanical methods could not be carried further. The organization is perfect. The machine works almost with the precision of clockwork. It is, however, company front all the time. From one point of view, children are regarded as automatons, from another as India rubber bags, from a third as so much raw material. They must move in step and exactly alike. They must receive the same mental nutriment in equal quantities and at fixed times. Assimilation is wholly immaterial, but the motions must be gone through with. Finally, as raw material, they are emptied in at the primaries and marched out at the grammar grades, and it is well. So, yes, it was a means of social control. And this was what I was talking about earlier when I said the corporations, the huge corporations got involved, the factories, they wanted reliable, dependable workers who were used to being treated like this and would go into the system and work and not complain. And so, yeah, that's why I said at the beginning of this, we were herded through public schools. That model essentially remains today.
Who decides what is taught in, I hear James Dobson talk about, that homosexuality is taught in kindergarten or something like that. And who decides that that's going to be taught in, the lower grades or whatever?
Who decides is the question, and you have some decisions are made at the level of the local school board, but you also have a state board of education, and you have a federal department of education, and as you go up the chain, it tends to be more liberal as you go, but local school boards can be very liberal as well. For example, in Atlanta, it's just as corrupt as anything can be. In fact, we just had that huge teacher cheating scandal where they were paying other people to take their tests for them. It was two things. The teachers were cheating on tests for the students, on standardized tests for the students. They got busted for that. And then the teachers themselves got busted in a cheating scandal where they had to take some federal test every year or every 2 years or something, and they were paying someone to take the test for them, and they all got busted. What did they end up doing? They kicked 6 people off the state board of education, just a handful. But yeah, they're the ones that decide that stuff, and they all tend to be liberal, especially at the state level, because liberals. I mean, this is a humanistic system. When the government is saying we're the ones in charge of the school system, then you're creating a law that you're dictating by law, by humanistic law, how these things ought to be, how they're to be taught, instead of allowing the command to come from God's word to the families about how to do education. It's being dictated by this board. Well, these people that I was telling you about, this rival religion, the modern progressive liberals are the outgrowth of that, I mean, to the extreme. And those people love those positions. They go to school just for those positions. They make connections all through their life just so they can get in those positions. And they will fight tooth and nail to get in that position so they can be the ones to determine what that curriculum is going to be. And they'll always push it. They're constantly pushing it. It's tyranny by the ratchet effect. You tighten the bolt a little bit, and when you swing the ratchet back, it click, 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 clicks, but then you're in place to tighten it down a little bit. You don't throw the clamps down all at once. You get a little bit here, a little bit there, and the next thing, the bolts of tyranny are down so tight you can't move. And these people at those levels, if you actually went to some of their private meetings, and I haven't, I've seen secret video of people that have been in them, and see what they really want to do, what their real goals are. I mean, it's off the deep end of socialism and communism. And that's the type of mindset that gets in those positions. And they know they can't get it all in one shot, so they'll push it a little bit. And first let's just start talking about homosexuality. And then let's introduce sex education in 6th grade. And then, there's no reason we can't introduce it in 4th grade. And the next thing you know, they're talking about legitimizing homosexuality in kindergarten. This is a serious topic of conversation. And it's corruption. And it's one more reason. It's not just that things have become bad over time, and so therefore Christians should get out of it because the curriculum's bad. It's the whole system is corrupt to begin with, and it was designed as corrupt to begin with. My line is that the public school system is a socialistic system taught by socialists for the purpose of making socialists. And there's really not much more to it than that. Ma'am.
My husband's a former teacher of a charter school, and that school is not even run by an educator, it's run by a business owner.
Yeah.
And he actually calls the parents their customers. He doesn't even consider the kids their students, their customers. And they've taken their social studies classes and their English classes and history and turned all computer, no teachers.
I see. And
they're heading that way now with the math and science. And he was terminated because, well, I don't know the real reason why he was terminated, but they're terminating all the Christian teachers. He was terminated a couple months ago, and since he was terminated, 6 other teachers have been terminated.
Yeah.
Because they're getting rid of the teachers, and it seems like it's the Christians that are going.
Yeah.
So
the charter system has got a lot of advantages over the standard public school, but my beef with it is it's still how it started and how it's originally funded is through the state. And private school is better down the line, in my opinion.
Is the Common Core curriculum, is that just a federal thing for America, United States, or is it a part of the Agenda 21?
My suspicion would be that it's Agenda 21 down the line. Agenda 21, I don't know if everyone knows what that is, but its whole program has been to masquerade as something local the whole time that it's not. And so Common Core is just deadly. It's the federal takeover of education.
Yeah, they're trying to take it. I mean, we've already basically taken it away from parents or whatever local level, and my understanding is they're trying to get it all at a national and an international level, so everybody is doing the same thing, the same time, in the same way, and in that way taking it out of the hands of the parents or at the local level, so you don't have any say-so at all.
Absolutely, I agree. Chapter 10 is on the executive branch, and I have a whole section there on Agenda 21 where I talk about the advent of that and how it masquerades. This is an inspiring story, by the way. It was the midnight efforts of some local activists, and these guys, nobody else knew about this. These were guys who were on conspiracy theory radio, the stuff that everybody considers cranks and kooks, but they were talking about Agenda 21, and they were able to get to, I think it was Senator, what was her name from Texas? Well, I can't remember her name. And through her, we're able to get to a couple of other senators. And they printed out the maps of what they want to do with America, how much property they want to turn into areas humans can't go. Anyway, it was just scary you to death. They put these maps up in the Senate and showed people what was going to be, and they actually blocked the treaty. And so it was victory on the part of these conservative activists. And if it hadn't have been for those kooks and cranks who were studying this stuff the whole time when no one else would listen to them, we would have a lot tighter relationship with Agenda 21 than we do now.
You mentioned in God versus Socialism about education, and of course you hit hard about this idea of Christians being against socialized medicine. You spoke about the Tea Party, you spoke about Republicans, this hypocrisy, and then spoke about the military industrial complex.
Mm-hmm.
Can you go into more detail about this hypocrisy, this weakness that we have as conservatives, not being consistent in our principles?
It was written in 2009. That's 3 years ago, and I've matured a lot since then, I have to say. Only in this respect, that I'm not as loose with the word hypocrisy. I think a lot of those people who began to wake up in the Tea Party era, especially many of the Christians, they do hold conflicting beliefs and actions, but they're not doing it consciously. They're not saying, I'm going to be against socialism over here, but I'm going to go be for it over here. If they were saying it like that, then I would say you're a hypocrite. But I think it was the fact that they just hadn't really completely woke up. I mean, they got hit in the face with a frying pan with Obamacare. And that was, that rang the bell, and they're against it. And when I was writing at the time, I saw that as hypocrisy. But the more I thought about it, there's more innocence and naivety there, and it's an opportunity for education among Christians. And if I put these things out there, I expect to be some pushback and some questions and even excuses. But I want to talk and push it and really push these people. And at the end of the day, if they considered it consciously and they still hold the views, then I say, now you're being a hypocrite. But yeah, I've said from the day one I didn't have a lot of faith in the Tea Party. And the reason is because it has these internal contradictions in it. They want to say we're against socialism, but it was only against Obamacare. And I remember it was actually on YouTube, you can look it up, there was one instance where one of the conservative members of Congress was being interviewed by, I can't remember which liberal it was, but it was on CNN, so it was a liberal. And this guy used the word, the congressman used the word socialism, and the guy came back at him directly and says, well, what about Social Security? He said, that's socialism. It came directly out of the Prussian government model. And this congressman, he just started doing this tap dance like I've never seen before. Oh, well, that's not socialism. No, we're not against that. No, we want the seniors to be taken care of and all that kind of stuff. And we all want the seniors to be taken care of, no doubt about it. But doing it through a state-enforced system of taxation, but which, by the way, is bankrupt, is no way to go. But it is socialism. And we as Christians, and actually I believe the church as an institution, needs to stand up and say, this is socialism. And if we're going to be against it over here, we need to be consistent and be against it over here. And that includes in federal or state-run welfare programs. That means in the military-industrial complex. That means in fighting wars that don't necessarily need to be fought. That means rethinking defense. And I'm Second Amendment down the line. I like to shoot and I like to blow things up like any Southern guy does. But I seriously want to step back and reconsider every single war we go into, and every single way that we go into war. We haven't declared war since, I believe, World War II. But we do have something called emergency powers. And did you know that the United States has been under a state of emergency since, I believe it was FDR. And in fact, he put us under 2 federal emergencies. And not only have those, I think his actually did get abated, but they overlap with others that came into place. Until today, I believe there are something like 26 or 27 federal emergencies that we live under daily, which gives the executive branch all kinds of power that he doesn't get when there's no federal emergency. But since those are in place, he's allowed to go bomb this place or to send arms to Libya or whatever was going on there. And you say, that's not constitutional. It's constitutional precedent all the way back to the 1940s. That when certain emergencies are in place, he's allowed to do those things. So, I mean, I kind of got off track there a little bit on the issue of socialism and hypocrisy, but there are all these kinds of issues that come up.
You made it, I think it was your book, you mentioned how, isn't it interesting that good Catholics send their children to Catholic school, good Muslims send their kids to Muslim school, Christians send theirs to become great Christians, great soldiers of the cross, they send their children to public school.
Oh, yeah.
And then they're going to come out being great missionaries.
As an author, and I have to say this is not just me, but I heard R.C. Sproul say it too, so there's some legitimacy to this. But you write stuff and you tend to forget what you wrote. And so you have to go back and read your own stuff once in a while. It's kind of like God during creation he would stop and go back and look over it and judge himself periodically. That's a model for all of us. Yeah. Of course, there's really no such thing as a good Muslim.
Right, of course.
Speaking colloquially, some of you guys who got in here late, we actually went through the whole discussion already. We're picking up the end of the Q&A, so.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah, I hate that you missed it, but I'm not going to go through it again, actually. So anyone else? Or was that a question or just a comment?
Well, I was curious if you had anything else you wanted to add to that.
Well, I think it's self-explanatory.
Yeah.
I had fun writing this book. Like I said, I was kind of gung-ho when I wrote this book, and so there are a lot of one-liners in here where I go after people like the Obama-Messiah and other people. But the thing is, when I wrote this book, it's all critique. God versus Socialism, a biblical critique of the new social gospel. And I start off with some biblical teaching on what socialism is, what private property is, who is king and why that matters, what happens when you depart from God as king of your life. And then the rest of the book is just critique of all the places in society where we've departed from that. And when I got done, my boss and my father-in-law, who's also a scholar, they came in my room and they said, well, Joel, you did a great job, because when you finish a book, it just feels so good. It's a job well done, so to speak. And they said, now you've written a negative book on what not to do. Now you need to write a book on what to do. And that's why Restoring America One County at a Time is designed to have, okay, here are practical steps where you can work in this area on this topic and down the line. So you do want to be that good Christian who does things according to the Bible. Here's what you can do. Here's some things to think about.
My understanding was, of course, the bottom line so far as, and not the education part of it now, because now every time I hear Common Core curriculum, I know that associates in some way with it. But my understanding was that bottom line, so far as property is concerned, that it will ultimately do away with, or they would like to do away with private property, all private property.
Sure.
And I understood, but you said there was a group that caused them not to sign on to it. My understanding was that the first Bush, George H.W. Bush, signed us on to some part of that.
I think he was at Agenda 21 in the original Rio de Janeiro meeting, which was 1992. And I don't remember his role, but he did not sign the treaty. And we were never formally brought under the treaty. And what happened was they tried to pass it under Clinton. I believe that would have been the following year, right? He took office in 93. And it got blocked in the Senate floor, like I said. So he actually did what he could as under executive order to facilitate the study of it and the proliferation of it in the nation, intellectually speaking. So he formed this, I think it was called the Sustainability Committee or something like that, Committee on Sustainability, and peopled it with a bunch of liberals and bureaucrats to study this and to, write recommendations for local governments. And so you actually do have several local governments, liberal places like San Francisco and places like that, who said, we're all on board. We want to implement these. And basically what it is a lot of strict zoning requirements, lots of impositions of green space and stuff like that, where, yeah, it's your property, but you can't use it. It has to be dedicated to the, dung beetle or whatever. I talk about this under the doctrine of private property. I talk about it in Restoring America. We've never had a doctrine of truly private property in this country. And I don't know how long you guys want to stay here, but this is a fascinating topic to me, and I've had to read some serious scholarly material on this to get to just tidbits of truth. But and I'm not just talking about the fact that you may have a mortgage and you haven't paid off the bank yet. Let's assume you do pay off the bank, and you get a deed to your property. What is that deed called, ma'am?
Deed of trust.
Yeah, it's called a fee simple deed, right? And that's the main, by the vast majority, the main form of property ownership in America, and really throughout the world. And that word fee, and that form fee simple, means that there is a higher entity that has a claim on your property as far as charging you a fee. It came out of the old feudal system in Europe, in which the true owner of the land was either the king or some baron who owned massive tracts of land, and you were allotted a small parcel on that land to live, but you had to pay rent to the landowner. That was the feudal system. You paid him a rent, and that rent was called a fee. And that series of fees was called a fiefdom. And so our own form of fee simple ownership comes directly out of that old feudal system, in which you still have an obligation to a quote-unquote overlord, if I can use that word. And the overlord in your system, in our system, is the county or the state. Because the county is a corporation created by the state. The cities are corporations created by the state. And your property is not owned outright because they have the legal right to charge you a fee, which we call property tax. And the system in which you have outright ownership of your property is called alloidal ownership, and it's extremely rare. It's almost impossible to get, because you have to petition the very people who are profiting from the fact that you're not that. So, we're not even free on the doctrine of private property that we all have cherished in American history all this long. So
we have a representative of North Carolina for our area, and she sent out an email to some homeschool people, including myself, and asked, because she's working on a committee to help give more freedom to homeschool families.
Mm-hmm.
She asked us what our advice would be, what we thought needed to be done. And one of the things we talked about was private property tax. And getting credit, getting some kind of, how can we get that money somehow, some way, through credit or a refund or something like that, since we're not able to use that money. And I can't take my kids to a school playground and say, play.
Right. I'd
get kicked off, but I paid for it. Although I did hear a man that did that one time, and that was actually a very interesting story. I had a very long conversation with a police officer. But the question was, can we still get those credits without the government thinking, oh, this gives us right to have some say-so?
Anytime there's a credit involved, then there's reporting involved and that kind of stuff. And I want the state out of it.
Yeah.
So the least amount of the state involvement there is, the better. Yeah. So I'm not necessarily an expert on the inner workings of all that, but my view would be whatever's less state is better.
The question I was going to ask was the feasibility of that request.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously it's going to be difficult.
Yeah.
You have to have, this is why it's important for Christians to do this, because you have to have popular support in order to get something like that. If it's just a handful of people, they're going to laugh at you. And I'm sorry, fall back in line. But if you have massive support, that's a whole different story. And but we have to. This is why almost the primary objective is to get this in the pulpits, Because until the average Christian starts hearing this and believing it, it's not going to make a difference. It'll be one person mouth to mouth here and there, and it'll grow slowly. But you have mass resistance. Not only do you not hear it in the pulpits, you have mass resistance from the pulpits and the pews. So until that changes, something like political change like that is not really feasible. Although sometimes, like in my state, I remember what else I was going to say too. In my state, they just had a measure in which one of our few requirements in the state of Georgia for homeschooling is you have to report attendance. The child has to be in home instruction for several hours a day, so many days a year, and you have to fill out a chart and send it to the state. It used to be to the county, local superintendent, and say, look, my child went to school this many times at home. That was the only thing you had to do. And they passed a law in the state because some of the local superintendents didn't like the extra paperwork. They didn't like dealing with the homeschoolers. And some of them were actually giving a hard time to the homeschoolers. And so what they did was some of the senators and congressmen got together and they passed a law to make the State Board of Education be the reporting center. And the State Board wasn't at all ready for this. And so they started getting inundated with paperwork from the entire state and emails, and they have an electronic system now, but it's still, they don't want to deal with it. So they said the good thing that may come out of this is they may end reporting altogether because they don't want to deal with it and don't have the resources. The other thing I was going to say is one of the things that does make it feasible is the fact that many counties in some states already have a precedent for it, and that is for the elderly. I know that in my state there's an elderly exemption, or I say elderly, it's more of a senior citizens or a retirees discount, that once you reach 60, or I can't remember the exact age, but once you reach that age, the portion of your property tax that went to public schools is no longer charged. Because the assumption is they're not using the system. And so I'm thinking, if you're not using the system, you don't have to pay. That gives me an argument on the floor of the Capitol to say, shouldn't this work for homeschoolers also? And private schoolers. And so, but I haven't got quite there. I have a senator who's probably open to working with me on it, but, I'm so busy with my ministry's work that I haven't gotten too much direct political action myself.
You said something about that some people they've come through school, made contacts to get to certain positions in whether it's the school board or the city council or planning boards, and they've been doing this for a long time. Well, using my family as an example, I'm busy. My wife's busy.
Yeah.
Our child is busy. Our dog is busy.
Yeah.
It's like one more thing to add to the plate. It's like I see it's a disaster. I see where it's going, and it's not good.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm like, I'm just busy, and it just a lot of good people doing not doing anything to go forward.
Yeah.
And so these other people just get into these positions, and if you look at them, it's like, what? That's the people that are running our different areas of government.
We're so dependent. There's so many people dependent on the millions and billions that come out of those positions that if you get a guy in there like me who was stake the hacksaw to it, I wouldn't last a term.
Right.
They'd kick me out in a heartbeat. But so it's a difficult thing, and we're all busy. There's no doubt about that. I will talk a little bit on Sunday evening when I talk about Restoring America One County at a Time, some of the tips I have on that, about setting up local watchdog groups, so to speak. And we're all busy, but not everybody's that busy, to be honest about it. There's especially, and this is where homeschooling comes in, especially as a homeschooler's, political science, civics, as a homeschooler's civics project. Go study your local county political system. Learn who's in place, learn who they are, where they come from, what's their background, where they go to church, what do they believe, and set up a website or a simple blog that does nothing but report what is going on at the county level. That homeschooler is busy, but he's not busy. He can go, especially, if we're talking to a senior or a high school student who's got a car and can drive or has access to a car. Let him go to the board minute meetings. Or, he doesn't have to go in some cases. Most counties post them online nowadays. Download it, let him learn how to read minutes from a meeting, see where the money's going, and that kind of stuff. Report it. Okay? Now you've got a whole group of people who's really being fed all this information. Now you don't have to stay on top of it all the time, but if there's an important vote coming up on a referendum, and you don't want $145 million being borrowed to pay for a new expansion of the school building or something like that, you get the word out to your whole group, to your whole church, whatever else, and because of the work of that one person who is following it, okay, you've got a network of people working. So that's, starting at the county level. Forget Obama. You're not going to change that right now. But you can change things in your backyard.